I call the meeting to order in the absence of a chair and a chairman. First item on the agenda would be the Pledge of Allegiance. Would you please stand and join me in the pledge?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, since we do not have a chair or a vice chairman, we need to elect a chairman for the night. They will only have that duty for the night. So if I could, I'd open the floor to nominations for a chair for the evening.
Make a motion to nominate Dr. Day as chairperson for the evening.
Motion for Dr. Day. Is there a second?
I'll gladly second.
There's a wealth of seconds. Any other nominations? I'll close the floor to nominations then. All in favor of Dr. Day being chair for the evening?
Aye.
The opposed light sign as the gavel slides down to the left. It's unanimous. Congratulations, Dr. Day. The agenda and the floor is yours.
Adjourn.
Oh!
Yeah, members of the audience might be having a problem with that.
The first order of business is any additions or deletions to the agenda. None from staff? Any from the commission? Fair enough. Next is approval of the minutes of August 10th, 2017. Anyone motion to approve?
Motion to approve.
Motion to approve by Mr. Stewart
Second.
and second by Mr. Landers. The approval of the minutes passes. The next item is an item that is not on consent. It is the lakes at Waterway Village. And I'm assuming those are pods, M, N, O, and P?
Correct.
Request for preliminary plan development, plan approval for 144 residential unit developed to be known as the Lakes at Waterway Village, pods M, N, O, and P. DeVosta Homes LP owner, Kimley Horn and Associates Incorporated is the agent. It is located at the northeast corner of 49th Street and 51st Court. The zoning district is PD, planned development. The land use designation is L2, low density, up to low density 2 up to 6 units per acre, and a density at 2.49 units per acre. So any ex parte reports for that? Anyone visited, driven by? Hearing none, should we swear in? We'll swear in all who wish to speak on this. The clerk will swear you in.
Do you swear affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
And we'll turn it over to staff.
Yes. Thank you, Chairman Day. John McCoy with the planning staff. And this is a request by Pulte DeVosta Homes for an addition to the development, the Lakes at Waterway Villages, pods M, N, O, and P. The subject site is located in sort of the south central portion of the overall Waterway Village development. And pods M, N, O, and P are at the northeast corner of 51st Court and 49th Street. And some of the development kind of leapfrogged them. They started out developing sort of in a west to east pattern. They developed this neighborhood, which is called the Isles at Waterway Village. Then they moved on to the Cove at Waterway Village. And the Lakes at Waterway Village are basically the residential homes that are going to be built between 51st Court and 43rd Avenue. So this will be an addition to the Lakes at Waterway Village with those 4 pods. This is an overall aerial that shows you, and the aerial is a little bit older. As you can tell from this aerial, the cove is under construction at this time. If you've been out to the site, say in the last 6 months, there are homes under construction in this area. This area's pod R is just being completed, and there are homes under construction in this area. And there was some fill on this site, which is being removed, and this will be the subject of the 4 pods, and you can see them on either side of the entry road. And let me advance a slide. It's 57 acres all in all for these 4 pods, 144 residential units. And really, this just fills in some of the residential development with perimeter buffers, stormwater tracks, and common areas. So, and this shows you, and Pod M is here. Pod O, Pod P, and Pod N. So those are the 4 pods, and again, they're bisected by Waterway Village Road, lying on the north and south side. Traffic circulation plan. The area east of this is under construction now. This will provide another connection to 51st Court and loop roads off Waterway Village for each pod. There'll be a gate off 51st Court. 51st Court is open to the public from 49th Street to 53rd Street, so the public can traverse. There's a gate at this location and a gate at this location. When this is constructed, along with pods S, T, and U, which you previously approved earlier this year, it'll make a connection to the future 43rd Avenue and 43rd Avenue. That northern segment will be built as part of pods S, T, and U. So once these 2 portions of the development are constructed, there'll be a connection to 43rd Avenue and then to 53rd Street. There are not a lot of dedications or improvements with these particular pods. It's mostly sidewalks that will facilitate pedestrian connections internal and along some of the perimeters of the project. From an environmental standpoint, the area is essentially cleared. There's not a lot of environmental issues with this particular. There were quite a few with Waterway Village that were addressed up front with the original DRI approval. Those continue to be monitored and continue to be ongoing environmental aspects that are reviewed with each phase. And there aren't that many tied to this particular phase. With that, I'd like to get the landscape and buffering plan. Internally, they'll essentially have sort of park-like backyards, so they'll back up rather than to lakes, they'll back up to green spaces. That'll be landscaped green spaces. The lots on the perimeter will back up to some lakes. The buffer along 51st Court is fairly in place. It'll need to be maintained and make sure it's in good shape upon a certificate of completion. And the buffer along 49th Street will need to be constructed as part of this, along with the littoral zones in the lake. Staff does recommend that the Planning and Zoning Commission grant preliminary plat approval for the lakes at Waterway Village, Pod M, N, O, and P, with the conditions listed in the staff report, and those are tied to the landscape buffers and the off-site sidewalks. Thank you.
Any questions from the commission?
I do. A couple
All
of
right.
questions.
Yeah.
One of those is the expansion of 43rd Avenue. I know when we approved the previous pods, where is the trigger for that to actually be required to happen?
It's in 2 separate segments, 43rd Avenue. The northern portion from this connection point north to 53rd is tied to what is called the certificate of completion for pods S, T, and U, which, my cursor back, are these 3 pods right here. So when these subdivision improvements are complete, it's supposed to have a paved connection to 53rd Street via 43rd Avenue. And then the second segment is from this portion south, and that's really dependent upon development that will end up being on the east side of 43rd Avenue. And once the first certificate of completion is issued for one of these neighborhoods, it would be the connection to 49th Street would be required at that point in time.
And that leads to the next question regarding the 49th Street. Is there any plans as far as, or requirements for widening of that street at that area?
Not with this particular development, there are not, and I would need to check with Public Works as far as any improvements. There may be a resurfacing that is going on, but I don't think with the resurfacing, it's a capacity expansion or a widening. I think there may be some bike paths or general widening or modernization of the road, since a lot of these older roads are not as wide as they should be.
Okay, Because I guess that's a question and a concern I have, because I know the one pod area down there for the school eventually. I mean, what would be a trigger, because that will be increased traffic if that school is ever built in that location.
Just for the record, Stan Bowling, Community Development Director. I don't think there are any plans in the long-range forecast for widening this segment of 49th Street. Like John said, there'll be improvements at intersections and so forth, and for the road itself, sidewalks, bike lanes, that sort of thing. The tract that's a little bit to the left or to the west of these pods is dedicated to for an elementary school site, and if it's not used within a certain amount of time, I think there's maybe 12 years left on that, John.
I don't remember the time frame. There is a reverter, as I remember it, in the dedication.
Right, to become park space. And I don't think that an elementary school, if it were to be developed there, would trigger itself the need for widening 49th Street in this particular area, especially since you have access to 51st Court, which is a public road going all the way up to the 4-lane 53rd Street. So I wouldn't think that we're going to be looking at widening 49th Street in this particular area. Now, the intersection further to the west there along 58th Avenue, from that stretch all the way up to 57th Street is going to be widened, and it'll be widening for all the approaches to 49th Street, to 57th Street, and to 53rd Street. So there'll be some good access through those intersections with that widening.
Okay.
Anything else? Is this PD request that we're discussing tonight the final one for this development, or will there be others for the east side of 43rd?
That's a very good question, and let me just sort of step back a little bit and see if I have a better slide to possibly this one. There are 3 additional residential pods that fall between 43rd Avenue and 51st Court, and they're the very north sort of central portion. They're pods H, I, and J, and they fall right up here. And you'll probably be seeing those either later this year or in the first half of next year coming through for preliminary PD approval. There is also in this same area approval for some accessory commercial development, 10,000 square feet of neighborhood commercial type uses. The applicant's thinking about what those might be, and really with retail the way it is right now being more internet based, it's taken the drive out of a lot of floor area for commercial, so they're thinking about what may be appropriate at that location.
Okay, so they'll come to us when the time is
Correct.
When the time is right. Yep. Anything else? Anyone from the audience want to speak on this? Please state your name and address.
Good evening, Board. Daniel Sorrow, representative of the applicant with Kotler and Hearing. Thank you, staff, for the presentation. We would like to request approval tonight consistent with staff's recommendation for the pod. And just to answer your question, we did submit an application for pods H, I, and J, and we're looking at a 42 or a 52-foot product in that development up closest to 53rd. So hopefully we'll be bringing that before you in the next couple months as well.
Yeah. Thank you. Anyone else? Commissioners, what's your pleasure?
I'll make a motion to approve as per staff recommendation.
Motion by Mr. Landers, second by Angela. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? It passes unanimously, if you can call this unanimous. Our next agenda item is a public hearing, and it's consideration of a proposed land development regulation amendment to Chapter 904, dealing with nonconformities. Should we swear in? No. No need. Okay, staff?
Yes. Thank you, Chairman Day. John McCoy with the Planning Department. This is a request to amend our Chapter 904, which is our nonconformities chapter. It's a very short chapter, about 5 pages. A little bit on process. This is a public hearing. You all would make a recommendation to the Board of County Commissioners, and the Board of County Commissioners would take final action. If it were approved, it would basically change the land development regulations. So from a process standpoint, that's what we're up to tonight, is amending our land development regulations, or attempting to amend our land development regulations. Just sort of a brief and general overview of nonconformities. Sort of 2 garden variety nonconformities. The site-related nonconformities, meaning the site has some sort of nonconformity related to its site characteristic. Encroaches in a setback on a commercial property that might be not enough parking, or a parking design that doesn't meet our current code. So that's those are examples of site-related nonconformities. The other type of nonconformity is a use-related nonconformity. So say a use was grandfathered in, and it's now residentially zoned, used as an office or a restaurant or something like that, but historically had been used, and that use is continuing. That would be a use-related nonconformity. So those are the 2 general types of nonconformities. Generally, with the land development regulations, the goal is to amortize nonconformities out of existence. So that's a general goal in the structure of the way the code is written. So the LDRs generally prohibit the expansion or intensification of nonconformities. And then also from the standpoint of repairing or maintaining nonconformities, there are some limitations, again, to help move those along or change them into conforming type uses. So that's sort of the general framework. Sort of how we got to this point from a historical perspective is in 1985 and 1991, the county undertook 2 countywide large-scale rezonings, meaning generally all the property in the county was rezoned. In 1985, we actually changed the districts. We had districts like R1A, R1AA, R1 AAA, R2A, R2A, R3A. Those have now become zoning districts like RS1, RS2, RS3, RM6, RM10. So that was a change both to the zoning designation on the property and the actual zoning district categories. In 1991, we went to a large comprehensive plan amendment, which also had a large scale rezoning. We kept the same zoning districts. We just applied those to different locations in the county. So that was a large-scale rezoning, but kept the same zoning districts. With both of those, the planners at the time took the precaution to try to make sure that nonconformities were not created, and that if there were nonconformities that were created, they were addressed in the code. So somebody could come in and go through a very straightforward, apply for a permit, you get a zoning district that makes sense, or setbacks that make sense for the size lot. And the LDRs specifically targeted legally created non-conforming lots of record. This county, like many counties throughout Florida, has a lot of lots that were created in the 1950s and 60s, some with improvements, some without, some with some modest improvements. So a lot of those lots are still out there, and a lot of them were rezoned at that point in time. So that's what the LDRs were reflected or amended to reflect, was to allow smaller setbacks on some of those smaller lots. And the LDRs that are in place have really been successful in addressing a lot of those issues. And I'll give you an example of non-conforming lots. This is I-95, State Road 60. These are agriculturally zoned lots, and these are agriculturally zoned lots. Well, agriculturally zoned lots, the minimum lot size is 200,000 square feet, which is almost 5 acres, and 150 feet of frontage. In these particular ones, they're nowhere near that size, but these were lots that were created in the 1950s and 1960s with an old plat out in this area. So they end up getting to use what are our RS6 setbacks, 20 feet front and rear. So some of these have been developed, I'd say, just shooting from the hip, roughly 20% of these lots are developed out in this area, maybe shy of 20%. But it's a practical means to allow use of the property. The background for the proposed amendment was a variance application. I believe you all are familiar, came to you all earlier this year. And it had a unusual factual set, which wasn't contemplated at the time the land developments were amended to address the smaller non-conforming lots. This one had a conforming lot, a legally established home that took advantage of or was built in accordance with the setbacks at the time, but then proposed an addition of a screen enclosure around a pool that was also legally constructed. And in applying the new setbacks to the screen enclosure, would be 15 versus the 10-foot setback. So a variance was requested. This body looked at that variance and denied it, but again, discussed alternatives. And I think both some of the Planning and Zoning Commission members and Board of County Commissioners sort of looked at it and understood that applying the land development regulations as they are resulted in an undesirable outcome with a screen enclosure offset from where the side of the home would be by 5 feet. So from an aesthetic standpoint, from a functional standpoint, that it wasn't necessarily a desirable outcome. So the Board of County Commissioners considered the appeal at its July 11th meeting. They denied the appeal, but as was suggested by some Planning and Zoning Commission members, the staff and some board members, they did direct staff to take a look at amending the LDRs to see if the LDRs could be amended in such a way that would be targeted and narrow enough to allow this, but not sort of reverse that whole concept of trying to amortize nonconformities out of the current code. So with that, the staff did propose an LDR amendment, and that's an attachment in your backup. And the goal is to allow an extension of a single-family nonconforming setback for an attached accessory structure, like a screen enclosure, when the nonconformities due to a county-initiated rezoning, again, a sort of unique set of factual circumstances, and the proposed LDR allows such additions that it does not exceed the degree of the nonconformity of the single-family home. In other words, it couldn't extend further into the setback, but it could parallel that same line. And a typical accessory would be a screen enclosure. If this LDR were adopted, the applicants and those similarly situated would just need to go through the standard building permit process. So there wouldn't be any additional process other than just applying for a permit for a screen enclosure, verifying that it met the exception within the code, and then it could be signed off and permit issued. So it'd go through sort of the normal zoning review at that point. So with that, staff does recommend that the Planning and Zoning Commission recommend the Board of County Commissioners adopt the amendment to the nonconformities ordinance. Thank you.
Any commissioner questions?
I have a couple.
Okay.
What other accessory structures are we talking about?
We don't want to be specific to screen enclosures, but there could be other accessory type structures. I'm not aware of any, but I want to leave it open in case there's.
Yeah, I think you could have a covered porch thing that wouldn't actually be a screening enclosure itself. It might be a hard roof to keep the same line there, you know, and just post if somebody wanted to merely have that and maybe later screen it in or not screen it in. So it'd be something like a screen enclosure or a hard roof over a patio. That's probably what we'd be looking at.
Mother-in-law suites?
Nope.
So this would be like the situation where the pool screen couldn't be extended with the couple's home. It now could be?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay.
It would address that situation, any similar situations. And again, I think one of the key points, as John was pointing out, that The key factor in this set of circumstances is a county-initiated rezoning, which are very rare. I mean, county's just done them really those 2 times in recent memory. I guess it's not that recent. In memory, during the 80s and 90s, and that really, I think, was the driving force in looking at this. This really was something that was a rezoning action that put the situation on the applicant. We don't believe there are many cases like that, but it would solve the problem for them and anyone who happened to be caught in the same set of circumstances.
I have another question.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think I brought this up the time before because what would happen if, due to whatever natural occurrence or whatever, that the existing house was no longer there? Would they be able to rebuild the house as it is?
It goes back to that whole nonconformity section and trying to remove nonconformity. So it does limit your ability to repair, replace, and it gets back, generally speaking, to a sort of a 50% rule if it's damaged by more than 50%. Now, there are a couple of exceptions to that rule as well. One would be if it were a natural disaster, declared natural disaster. You get to go back and become whole again. So, but for a fire, a lightning strike, something like that, then the nonconformity would be terminated, and we would look for any reconstruction, both of the home and the screen enclosure, to meet the 15-foot setback.
What's interesting in this situation, because there's an allowance built into the code for the screen enclosure, let's say that something takes out the screen enclosure that's built under this provision, but the house is fine. The screen enclosure can be replaced because it's a code provision, so it'll get a little more protection that way.
Okay.
Anything else? I know when we talked about this back in May, you weren't sure, from your point of view, whether there'd be a flood of requests. And I know from the report that you've written for today, you think that the requests will be very rare.
That's correct. We went back and looked at the subdivisions that had a previous type of zoning, and then this type of situation, and when houses were constructed and so forth. And we don't think that there are many. We would say probably less than 20, if that.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else? Can the public speak on this?
Open the public hearing.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll open the public hearing. Anyone from the public want to speak? Name and address, please.
Yes, Hal McAdams at 540 61st Avenue. The proposal put before you tonight by the staff, I would like to ask that you approve that recommendation by the staff and for consent of this change to the code. There we go.
Good.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Charter school students, you don't want to ask a question? No, that's okay. Okay. All right, then I'll close the public hearing and entertain a motion.
Motion to pass.
Okay. Got a motion to pass?
Second that motion.
Got a second? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes.
Thank you.
Yep. Way to stay with it.
Yeah.
And that was the way to, and we knew at the close of the last meeting when you spoke, we knew that it was disappointing, but we knew that there was an avenue.
We appreciate it.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep. Any commissioner matters? Any planning matters?
Just two, Mr. Chairman, we think in terms of meetings that are coming up, that there will probably not be the need to meet on September 14th. We do believe there will need to be a meeting on September 28th. And in the event that anyone in the audience notices that Ms. Waldrop is pretty distant from the rest, there's no shunning going on here at all, but just a little precaution here. So Other than that, Mr. Chairman, that's it. We think a meeting for September 28th.
Good. Any attorney matters?
No, sir.
Excellent. This meeting is adjourned.
That's